Want help to grow your business? Download Bryn, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit bryn.ai or search the App Store today.
Hi, welcome to the latest issue of Think Global Middle East edition. My name's David Thomas, and in this show I have Cynthia and Nizar with me, and we're going to tackle this important issue about the geopolitics in the region and the past, present and future, which of course is on everybody's mind when they consider doing business in the Middle East. So firstly, welcome guys, thanks for coming.
Hi David, thanks for having us.
So let's start with the past. Cynthia, why don't you help us by putting some historical context around the changes and influences in the Middle Eastern region that are affecting us today. How would you set the scene around that?
Well, it's a really complex question, David, so let's try and simplify it by thinking about four key things. The way that I see it, a lot of what has shaped the Middle East over the past century or so is to do with lines on a map, the Palestinian question, the Sunni-Shia divide, and lastly, oil and the impact that that's had. So if we think firstly about the lines on the map, at the end of the First World War, the Middle East was essentially divided up by the victorious allies to represent what they thought was the correct setup. Now, without going into too much detail here, the way they drew the lines on the map essentially cut across a lot of ethnic and religious groups. And so it ended up creating areas where there were people of very different persuasions living together. And so that got things off to a rather unsettled start. So that's what I would say about lines on the map. Would you agree with that, Nizar?
Yes, of course. I mean, there was families who were torn in between different countries. Not necessarily that those tribes or families, they had different perspective on how to do things, different culture, as Cynthia has mentioned. Referencing to the Palestinian issue, basically, because that was a big struggle. There was a lot of Palestinian displaced from Palestine and went into different countries. And when they came into those different countries, they were very vocal about their cause, and people started interacting with them, and they knew what their cause is, and they started influencing politics of the other countries as well.
Yeah, and then the Sunni-Shia divide.
So, there are a lot of ethnic and religious groups within the Middle East, but the two major ones that are the best known are the Sunnis and the Shia, who are two different sects within Islam. So it's a little bit like Protestants and Catholics in the Christian tradition. Now, in some places, Sunnis and Shias have managed to live together very, very happily for hundreds of years and marry each other. But when religion gets politicized, you have problems. And unfortunately, religion in the Middle East has gotten very politicized along the way. Governments have used it as a tool of persuasion for populations. And Sunnis and Shias have become very suspicious of each other. And so there is a lot of mistrust between those groups. And political alliances have really formed along religious lines. So, you have the Sunni states teaming up as a bloc. So Saudi, UAE, Egypt, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain are all in a bloc along with Jordan and Morocco. And then you have states which are more allied to the Shia way of thinking, such as Iran, Lebanon, to some extent Syria, and also Iraq, which was ruled by Sunnis, but it has a majority Shia population, and the political dialogue is really fractured out along those lines. Sometimes it's just this kind of simmering discontent. Sometimes it erupts into full-scale conflict of the kind we're seeing in Syria at the moment. So that's been a really shaping factor.
And then on top of all that, you've then got the oil price and the oil-producing countries and the relationship with the US, which created more instability.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been very salient economically, obviously, because you've got at least 6 states in the Middle East that were almost entirely dependent on oil for their wealth. So those are Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, Bahrain, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates. They built their wealth on oil. But I mean, oil has also been something that's highly political because the global economy is developed so that it's dependent on oil. And for a long time, more than 60% of the world's oil was coming from that part of the world. it gave the Middle East a lot of power, and it affected the way that countries like the United States of America interacted with the region. So up until about the 50s, the Middle East didn't really figure very heavily in US thinking at all. And then as the US became more dependent on oil with the boom of the auto industry and industrial manufacturing, and it became more independent on oil, it became more closely tied to the region. And then that was complicated by America's relationship with its Jewish population and the feelings of the Jewish population about what was going on in Israel. So it's become, quite a complex picture.
Yeah. Now, when I was a young boy growing up in London, my parents used to travel around the Middle Eastern region quite a bit. I remember in the 60s, they would go to Palestine, they'd go to Beirut, they'd go to the Lebanon, they'd go to Tel Aviv. And these were very peaceful, friendly countries, great places to visit, and they always came back talking about what a wonderful time they had. So what went wrong?
What happened? What do you think?
Pretty much, look, it's a combination of things, basically. So, some social injustice, inequity, and also, adding to it, oil fueled up a lot of, it's just focused the attention on the area, basically, and then other global forces started looking at the area, and they wanted to secure their oil for industries. The volatility of the area itself, because there's too much variables, attracted intervention.
To continue enjoying this presentation, download Brin, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit brin.ai or search the App Store today.